Okay, we are online, so I will start to share the link. You can start.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Hello, this is Paula Espinosa. I'm executive member of FOIAG, the Federation of the Green European Organization. So here we are today with a webinar that the Inclusion and Gender Working Group have prepared. And also I want to welcome Linnea, who is member of the European Parliament. She's from Sweden, and she's specialized on gender and energy topics. So thank you very much, Linnea, for being here. I also want to say hello to those who are online now and also to the participants who are going to be at the European Youth Festival, which is going to happen the 1st and the 2nd of June this year. And it's going to be a very huge event in Strasbourg where many young people are going to meet. And in fact, FYD is going to be present, and we are going to do a workshop regarding gender and climate change. And the name is the Battle Against Climate Change and Feminist Battle. And that's why we wanted to have an introduction today with the MEP Linnea Armstrong. And yeah, and yes, and she has written a book related to this topic, and we think that gender equality also it's another dimension of difficulties experienced in agricultural and rural areas, which are often the poorest and the most vulnerable population to the impacts of climate change. And that's why sometimes we're forgetting that energy is also linked with gender inequalities, and that's why here is Linnea, who is going to present and who is going to explain many interesting things. So please don't forget to put your questions on the chat that it appears there on YouTube, and we will try to answer them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Paula, for that introduction. I'm extremely happy that the FYEG is doing this seminar and the webinar as well. I think we are really in the midst of building like a new environmental movement. Also, of course, connected with the Me Too campaign that is taking on like all of those big challenges that we have to solve in our society, we as the younger generations. So I'm extremely happy that that you're doing this, and this is the book, of course. I hope you all got it. I have a few copies left in English. I'm sorry, I only have it in English and in Swedish so far. But now it's also actually resolution or report in the European Parliament. So the whole European Parliament has, with a big majority at least, the right-wing extremists, of course, they didn't vote for this report, but mainly like a big majority did. And so the European Parliament has also endorsed these ideas around that gender is so crucial in order to tackle climate change. And you talked about energy, of course. Energy is the main problem that we have to solve in order to tackle climate change. But of course, this book has a few political ideas, of course, but it's also based around the idea that we as women, we as young women and men, of course, but we need role models. And of course, intergender, trans people, we all need role models. I had a very important person that showed me that it was possible to get into politics, and her name was Saida Catalan. She was actually murdered in spring in Congo, where she was stationed, and she was investigating all of these horrible atrocities against human rights in Congo. But she was a very important person because she showed that it was possible for a young woman to be a candidate in a political election, which I never thought I was going to be. So the book is really based around role models. Why is role models so important? Because it's about leadership, right? It shows, they can show you that it's possible to solve really, really tricky and hard problems in our society. So that's why I have 9 women that worked around environment and climate and gender. And I guess some of you already know maybe Wangari Maathai. She was the founder of the Green Belt movement in Kenya. But I'm also talking about Vandana Shiva, of course. She's very, very well known. She's an activist, she's a philosopher, she's an academic. She's not a politician, but she's very political. And I think all of these, they gave me the strength when I got into politics, really to move these ideas, because these ideas were very, very questioned, and they are still, not among young people, I would say, but among older, who think that you shouldn't mix energy with climate with gender. They don't really see the point in saying that climate change is a human rights issue, which I think is really, really damaging to the cause and to the movement as well. So I think we and you as young leaders, you really have a very, very important role to play in talking about gender and human rights as a prerequisite, really, to tackle climate change. Should I speak more, or we go into a kind of Q&A? Or, I mean, I can of course say a lot of things, but I also want to be open to questions if there are, like, if you have questions or from the audience.
In fact, thank you, Linnea, for your words until now. In fact, there is a chat on the link on YouTube, and I really appreciate if those who are connected to this line could also make questions and ask whatever you want during these minutes that we are going to talk with. We are talking with Linnea, and in fact, for the moment, there's no any question, but I have some questions. In fact, I know that you are working on the European Parliament since so many years, and I would also like to know how are you working and how are you linking gender with energy at this moment, and also if, I don't know, if you are working in some papers or in some directives or some important policies that you are doing in the European Union nowadays.
What I'm trying, my main committee is actually the fisheries committee. So that's where I'm really trying to do my environmental work and also this work on gender. I'm also a gender coordinator in the environment committee. But I can mention that later. It's been extremely tricky, actually, to work in the environment committee. What I want to do is really to gender mainstream, like all of these ideas on women's rights, on human rights. They should, of course, be incorporated in legislation. I mean, that's what we're doing in the European Parliament, and that's what's important. What I'm trying to push for, a concrete example that I have right now that I'm trying to push, is that the European Union, and especially Spain and France, they are very, very active in the fisheries partnership agreements that we have with third countries, for example, mostly on the African continent, where we pay a sum to access the waters, and also we pay a sum to some kind of, it's not really development aid, but it's called sectoral support. None of these money goes to women. And I've been traveling now around West Africa, and what you have to know about women in fisheries is that they are at least 50% of the workforce. They might not be fishermen because it's still very, very gendered stereotypes, like, you know, the women take care of the fish when it comes ashore, but men are usually the ones who go out to fish. But the thing is that women play a really, really crucial role in the whole of West Africa in transforming this fish for the local markets. So, I mean, we, of course, as European Union, go there to fish, and we take actually a lot of fish, for example, tuna and other species. But women in West Africa, they transform the fish, and which is very, very important for the local economy and for the local population. That's their main source of protein. And these women, they face enormous pressure. They face enormous challenges. I was there just a couple of weeks ago, and I was terrified to see the conditions that these women, and they usually have their children with them also, that they have to work and they have to live under. So my main goal right now is that to get the EU to have a special section of this sectoral support that goes to women. This is, of course, the national governments who decide how they want to distribute it. And when they do, not a single euro goes to these women, not in the whole of Africa, that's the case. And if you look at climate change funding, it's exactly the same. So we know that we have to empower women in these countries, because those are the countries that are most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. I mean, even if we have the possibility to stop the emitting of carbon dioxide, we still have gone so far that we can already now see that we have tremendous impact in some countries with rising sea levels, with droughts, with all of these things. And actually, it's the most vulnerable people, of course, who are most badly hit. So the poor, the sick, the children, and women, of course. So what I'm trying to do is actually, to earmark money that goes to women. What I've been trying to do, and that's, of course, a very, very slow, exhausting process, that's also to have these kind of language in everything that we do on climate change. So when we had the Paris Agreement, we had a parliament resolution that said also, we as Greens got that text in, that this is a human rights challenge. This is a challenge that affects women much severely, and that's why we need climate finance to go to women. So this is how, and I think the situation has very, very much improved actually the last couple of years. I mean, for the first time ever in history, we have a gender action plan in the climate change agreement, for example. That means that all member states, or actually all member states in European Union and all states that has signed the climate change agreement, are obliged to work with gender. So we didn't have anything like that previously, and now we have kind of a roadmap as well on how they're going to take on this challenge. So I think there's a lot of things going on actually under the surface in these issues that is really happening right now. But as I said, the main focus, I mean, I had the report voted actually in January. So that's a great tool for everyone to use. I mean, if FYEG or any movement wants to use that report as a way of saying, hey, the whole European Parliament is behind these ideas on gender and climate change, then it's free for everybody to use, of course. The next topic that I might come into later is, of course, migration, which is extremely challenging and difficult, and which was also, I think, a big win in the report, that we got in some good language on migration, which is very important, of course.
Okay, thank you very much. I also have some questions regarding these things that you were mentioning. You say that the whole Europe is working in order to establish a kind of an agenda regarding gender and energy. And I would like to know, how many time do you think is going to be necessary in order to implement all of these things? Because sometimes we are thinking that policies need to be done now in order to have the experiments of change now. But I see that this is something that could happen, that it takes a long time. And also, I have another question regarding young people. I don't know if you have experienced more discrimination to those women who are also young. And also I wanted to know how it's possible, or if it's possible, that they also I don't know, help in order to change the situation of discrimination towards the women.
Yeah, thanks. I think the problem now is that we have so little time, and we have to stop. We have to keep the global temperature under 1.5 degrees. I mean, I'm sure you know that. That's usually something that is very hard for people to understand. Okay, but what does 1.5 degrees really mean? So in Spain, it's going to be a really, really hot summer, right? But in a country like Nigeria, it's not going to be possible to live anymore, really. And it's already happening now. I mean, I don't think we talk so much about 1/3 of the people that is actually in the boats, you know, crossing the Mediterranean are from Bangladesh. And those are really climate refugees because they can't live in their countries anymore. They've lost all their belongings in a storm, for example, or when the sea level rises. So I mean, we have to do all of these things now. That's the pressing part of it all. Of course, if we don't have a movement, if citizens are not aware, if they don't push for change, then we can't. It's going to be very, very hard with all of these let's say more difficult issues, because if you want to make expensive cars that is driven with batteries, let's say, that's business. So that's going to be quite easy to get companies to convince them to do this. To invest in poor women in Africa, I'm not sure that there are so many companies who wants to do that thing. But of course, that's also happening. I mean, we have this all of kind of pro bono work and all of this development aid. Of course, the EU has a lot of development aid. So I also visited a very interesting project when I was in West Africa, where they actually are putting EU funding into training young people to really not to be migrants, but rather to stay in their country, which is very, very difficult sometimes, and to really get them to get some tools to have a good education and to go and get a good job. So I think that's what we have to do. I mean, I'm a feminist, and going into your second question, of course there are totally different obstacles for women and men still today in the European Union. I was shocked when I came into the European Parliament to meet so much discrimination, so much harassment, so much, I mean, let's say, crazy things that you don't expect from your colleagues at all. So I think, and I mean, if it's something that it's going to change and has already changed the situation for me and for the other young colleagues, is the Me Too movement. Because that with the Me Too movement, you could really show that the people are behind us. We who work for gender equality, we have a lot of women, like millions and millions of women who have experienced sexual harassment, really. So I think that this kind of movement was a shock to some people. They just didn't expect that maybe one or two in a workplace, but every single one. No, that's not possible. And in their professional life, it's like when you go to a bar, maybe you expect to have, someone grabbing you or something, but in your workplace. So I think not to be too negative, but I think it's, once again, we need role models. We need to have a deep discussion on, I mean, what kind of politicians are we really breeding also in this environment? Because is it really possible to have children? I mean, is it possible? I would say with these norms that we're working with today, I would say no, because it's a male norm. It's a norm that is constructed around a man with a housewife. So I think that we have a lot of work to do, actually. And I really hope that me and the other colleagues can make a difference, so that women who comes after me will not experience the same things that I have done. So that's my firm belief. I think young women experience a lot of terrible things on a daily basis that men not doesn't encounter. Of course, men, and let's say it also, I mean, there we have all of these people who are maybe intergendered or something like that. They face difficult obstacles. I mean, I think men encounter a lot of violence actually in the public sphere, that is also, of course, gendered in a sense. But this professional life, and I think also there's a difference when you if you want a family, if you start a family. I think that's where the real big difference happens actually.
Thank you. Now there is a question from the public.
Okay.
In fact, Leah Charlotte, she's saying, thank you a lot for the discussion. The points that have been raised are very important. And also she's asking and wondering, what can we do when we are not policymakers in this sense? I don't know if you have any maybe advice or idea.
Oh my God, you are so important. You're the most important people ever. I mean, policy makers, of course, but without people like you, there is no policy making. There is no support for the work that we do. So I think, I mean, engaging in a movement like FYEG or Greenpeace or Women's Lobby or whatever. I mean, discussing with others, doing net activism. I mean, internet activism. Engaging with others, writing books. I mean, I was not a writer before I did this. Now you have this amazing opportunity that you can like crowdfund. You can do a crowdfunding project, and then you just find a publishing company, and you can publish your own material. Then you just distribute it to everybody. I mean, we have so many amazing tools to our advantage right now. And I mean, start with your friends. Just have a dinner, discuss what is happening to you. That's the first start. Then you take the next step. It's really, I mean, I think that coming back to what happened. I mean, I know I will nag about the Me Too movement, but I think it's so important because it really, you know, was this spark that could lift like the feminist movement, I would say. And I think we need something similar for the if you talk about clean energy movement or climate change movement. I think we need to connect to each other and to create like this new movement that is really based also on, of course, anti-racist policies. Just be creative. That's and just go for really believe in your ideas, use the internet, really engage with others in real life and have fun. I mean, have a dinner and go to a bar, and we need more political conversations, I think. Usually it's not, I would say, we have some important discussions going on, of course, in the European Parliament. But I personally rather speak with like ordinary people, because people are very clever and they have a lot of ideas actually. So that's where I find my energy really. I don't know if that was an answer to that question, but I hope that you feel inspired at least.
Yeah, I think it was really a good answer. And also regarding to this point of creativity as well and participation of the civil society, etc. I wanted to ask you, in 1 year, more or less, we are going to have the European elections. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, how do you feel nowadays, how is going to be the position of these two topics? on the European Parliament elections campaign. I don't know if you think it's going to be a topic where all politicians and the social media or the journalists are going to talk about it, or you think it's going to be something that is not going to be very influential for the media, etc., and also for the interest of the people.
Yes, I mean, I think we have this kind of challenge, of course, to get through to mainstream media. That's always the case. But I think if we can connect with each other, for example, the American movement, I think we stand a very good chance. What we're trying to do right now is to develop a toolkit around the climate change, energy, and gender equality nexus, let's say. And where we want to distribute this tool to all green parties in Europe, and of course also to you guys. I mean, the young movement, the global Greens. Everybody should be able to use it, because we feel that we have to have some knowledge and maybe some good examples as well. I mean, for example, I met some amazing women from a coal mine district in Spain, in the north of Spain. And they told me that they were really, how the transition is going, like this fair transition that when we leave fossil fuels behind us, how is that going to, what kind of tools do we have, and how we're going to phase out these old coal mines and go into renewable energy. And they were stressing really that we really need to invest in these women. They used to be maybe always were like the second class citizens in a coal mine society, for example. It's usually men who work in the coal mine, and then the women are just housewives or works in a bar or something like that. And now the opportunity, let's say, I mean, all of these crises, that is actually a crisis with many of these societies, it's also opportunity for women to take a step forward and to be really engaged and to be empowered also in this movement. But I think we need to collect all of these stories in order to show that this is really happening now. And it's a green transition really has to be a gender equal transition. But I don't have I don't think it's going to be on top of the agenda, of course, because if you look at a very influential committee like the Environment Committee, we rarely speak about gender in connection with climate change. And we had severe difficulties, I would say, to invite any woman, any activist, any politician who had been working on these issues to come and to a hearing in the Environment Committee. It took a long time for them to even recognize them. Of course, there's only men who's sitting there. So they say no to everything that we propose. I think it's very embarrassing, since it's in the treaties that the European Union institution has to work with gender equality. It's a shame that they're not doing it. They are actually stopping the whole development of these very, very important issues that is about survival. It's about life for people. But they just don't want to take it on board. It's a shame.
Yes, totally. And in fact, we have another question from the public who are wondering how to tackle discrimination that might rise, especially about the intersection of woman, race, migration, possibly also religion.
Yes. The $10,000 question. I'm really into representation. That's why I wrote the book, as saying that. And as you can see, I thought it was very, very important that it was not only white women, for example. I mean, we have a severe challenge in our societies with discrimination, with religious discrimination, with racial discrimination, with functionality, with, of course, gender identity. All of these things. I mean, it's for sure. And when political parties choose their nominees, they go for the, in their minds, most certain candidate. And that's usually a man, and that's usually a white person with no disabilities, let's say. So I think, and that's why we have 70% or more white men in the European Parliament, for example. So, I mean, I think now we really need to get more people of color into politics and into the debate. I think it's embarrassing, really, in my home country when we're talking about climate change. There's always this whole white panel and whole male panel. And when we know that it's actually the people who are mostly bad hit who are the also sort of the bearers of the solution of all of these things. So I think representation. I think the political parties need to nominate more women of color and more young people and more people with disabilities or intersex people as well. Is that going to happen? No, not without like severe pressure from members, from public, from all kinds of things. And there comes the part on education, I think. So we have to keep on pushing, but we also have to have this kind of educational momentum as well, that, you know, you have to start informing people why it's so important about representation. Then I think we have a very good solution in the Green Party, at least in the Greens in Sweden. We can only be a politician for example, in the European Parliament for 10 years. So we can only be there for 2 mandates. Then we are rotated. I mean, then someone else has to come in. So people also have to move. I mean, if we're going to change how our society works, like hierarchies and power structures, people have to start moving away. So someone has to move and someone else has to come in, and that's very important.
Yes, so I see that there's no more questions coming from the public, but I think it was really, really nice, this conversation together with you, Linnea. Yeah. And I don't know, maybe if you want to conclude with some other things that maybe you want to share, also about your book, and how maybe can we get the book and read more. Maybe it's the moment to do it now.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to, if you like the ideas and are interested or curious, you can always email my office. The email address is on the European Parliament side, and we'll send you a copy. It's also, of course, available online at Publicist or in bookstores in Sweden, mainly, actually. So I just wanted to say maybe some short words also on migration. I mean, we know that, unfortunately, things are not moving in the right direction, at least not for European policies. We will have some kind of revision of the Dublin system, but it's not going to be based on human rights or any idea that we think is appropriate or you know, well thought through. It's going to be just a matter of keeping people out. And when we look at climate change and what is happening to societies in our neighborhood countries on the African continent, I would say that we have some severe challenges. And I also address this in my book. I say that once again, we have to invest in the people who are on the local level, who have the solutions for these problems. And of course, they also have to be included in political conversations in our main institutions. So that's always also, of course, what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to take all of these experiences that they share with me and lift them into the European Parliament discussion, and also, of course, to invite them. So I think the topic on migration is going to be one that we really, really have to work with, and on a global scale. We really need a global solution to all of these. So we, of course, we have the UN Global Compact for Migration, and that might be a tool to also enhance gender equality, actually, in that tool. But thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm really, really happy that we had this conversation. And if there are any questions, or if you want to, I mean, I have another book with gender and fisheries as well, which I also provide for free. So if anyone is interested to have, I mean, more questions, or you want, and of course we have the toolkit coming out as well from the gender climate core group, the climate core group in the European Parliament with the Greens. So so that will be available in a couple of months, and then you can all start doing your own stuff out in the society.
Okay, thank you very much. The Gender and Inclusion Working Group and also FYG in general will try to pay attention on all of these, also the papers that European Union will launch and everything. And also maybe it will be a possibility to have another conversation with you in the future and see how it's going on. And also I want to remember all of you, those who are watching the webinar right now, that FYG is going to participate in the European Youth Forum, festival, in Strasbourg, and there we will talk further on these topics. And I think today it was really a good introduction, and hopefully we can meet all of you there, and we can have more ideas, and we will go further on these topics. So thank you very much to you, Linnea. It was really a pleasure, and to everyone who was watching us. Thank you, and bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.